Hi, this is Dave Gormley with Andrews, Bungar, Gormley, and Claggett. If you're watching this video, you probably already found our website, southernmarylandlaw.com. As a bankruptcy lawyer, I often am meeting with people who are trying to figure out what their options are. Some people will come in and they think they know exactly what they want to do. Other times I'll have people who are coming into my office and they're just trying to figure out what can they do. Either way, one of the first things that I think is helpful for them is to have a good sense of what the different types of bankruptcies are. So just going to give a brief overview, and we have some more details in the article that's attached with this video. Just gives a brief overview of the different types of bankruptcies and what are your options. Two primary options for an individual who is looking to file for bankruptcy are most likely going to be a Chapter 7 and a Chapter 13. In a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, that's typically what people are thinking of when they think of filing for bankruptcy. A Chapter 7 is kind of a straight bankruptcy where you get your debts wiped out and you move on with your life. To do this type of bankruptcy, you have to jump through a couple of hoops. When they changed the bankruptcy laws in 2005, one of their goals was to push more people into a Chapter 13 payment plan where they pay back some of their debts over a 5-year period. In the Chapter 7, to qualify for that type of bankruptcy, there are some income tests, and it's based on household size and median income for the state where you reside. So we got to look at your income. Next thing we got to do is look to see what expenses you have and whether they would qualify you, make sure that you can pass what is called the means test. The next hoop is kind of looking at your assets. When you file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, there's only a certain amount of assets that you're allowed to keep. Each state has their own rules, and you go with the state's rules that you've lived in for the last 2 years. So sometimes we'll have to look at what other states' exemptions are if you've only lived in Maryland for less than 2 years. Sometimes I think that those exemptions tell you a little bit about the different states. Each state has their own exemptions, or they elect the federal exemptions. So Maine, for instance, has exemptions for firewood and for heating fuel. And then some other states, Oklahoma has exemptions for a number of chickens and cows and livestock. Maryland, not as interesting. It's pretty much dollars and cents. Grossly oversimplifying it, Maryland's exemptions let you keep about $12,000 of assets. Now there's a bunch of other exemptions for specific types of assets that expand that, but the basic ones that most people are looking at is about $12,000. And we've got those categories broken down in the article that's part of this video. But really, those exemptions go further than you might think. For instance, you're looking at a car, you're looking at a Kelley Blue Book or Edmunds.com private party value, and you subtract out what you owe in it. So when you total up all your assets, usually those go a pretty long way. There's also a special exemption in Maryland for a homestead or equity in your house. And that's around $23,000, and it adjusts each year following kind of the federal guidelines. Once you've jumped through those hoops and you think you qualify for the Chapter 7, we got to look at what your other options are too. If you're looking to save your house and you're behind on your mortgage payments, then you might want to do that Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is a payment plan bankruptcy that helps you get caught up on your bills and get rid of some of your unsecured debt. It also helps you protect assets that you might lose in that Chapter 7. So it's basically a 3 to 5 year payment plan. You're looking at what are your income and what are your expenses, and you're going to pay back that amount over a 5-year period, and the trustee is going to take that money and sprinkle it among your creditors. So if you have an asset that is non-exempt and you want to keep it, you might file a Chapter 13 instead of that 7 so that you can pay back extra money through that Chapter 13 to make sure that you can protect that asset. Or it can stop a foreclosure and you get caught up on that arrears by making your regular mortgage payment, and then the trustee takes care of the arrears. There are limits as to who can file a Chapter 13. You got to be a person or individual, and the issue there becomes one of your secured debt and unsecured debt limits. Now those are pretty high, but if you have several different pieces of real estate, you might have an issue with the secured debt limit. Or if you have a bunch of student loans debts, or you have a house that's foreclosed upon and you have a deficiency judgment, you might be over the unsecured debt limit. In that case, you're probably looking at having to file a Chapter 11 reorganization plan, but that's really a much more complicated and expensive process. It's really designed for big companies. So when you hear something about some airline or car manufacturer filing for bankruptcy, it's usually going to be that Chapter 11 and they try to reorganize. If that fails, Circuit City or one of these companies that have gone under, they have to convert to that Chapter 7 and liquidate. And they don't have any exemptions, so they basically just sell off the company's assets and pay as much of the debts as they can. Then we kind of get into the other bankruptcies that really aren't that common. One that you might think is more common than it is Chapter 12, which is for family farmers and fishermen. And that's kind of a super Chapter 13 that's designed for those small business people that fall into those two categories. It just really ups the limits for the unsecured debt and the secured debt that you can file a Chapter 12 and having instead of go through that Chapter 11 process. It's fairly narrowly defined. Unless you have a real whole lot of debt, you might do a 13 even if you were a family farmer and fisherman instead of the Chapter 12. The other two types of bankruptcies are much less common, and one of those would be the Chapter 9, which is for municipalities. Uncommon, but when it does happen, you do hear about that in the news with Detroit or various counties that have had to file that type of bankruptcy to deal with their debts. And then the last one is the Chapter 15, which is a cross-border. It's kind of more of an administrative thing for a big company that has assets in various countries, and they want to deal with those assets that are here. So that's one that you're not likely to have to deal with. Hopefully this video is going to give you a little bit of a background so you understand what these different types of bankruptcies are. And then when we do your initial consult, we can talk about which one's best for you, and you'll have a better understanding and you can play more of a role in helping to decide which is the best course or whether bankruptcy is right for you. Thanks for listening.